For 3 weeks in the year 2002, an Army vet and a 17-year-old kid crisscrossed the Washington, D.C. area doing one thing: murdering innocent people chosen at random. Did they do it to extort $10 million from the government to start a utopian society? Or was it to murder a wife and take back custody of children? And why would a young man follow so aimlessly the orders of another, ultimately becoming the man responsible for weeks of shootings? This is the story of John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, the DC Snipers. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Podorf. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Well, welcome back, everybody.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
They did the 3 welcomes.
Yep.
It's officially Hitched to Homicide Day.
Yep, it's my little saying now.
I know. Wherever you're listening, be sure to like, rate, and review. That helps other people to find us. We do have a Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. It's growing like crazy.
Yeah, we love all the feedback that's in there. Some of the stuff is hilarious.
Yeah, you guys are funny.
Yep.
Very funny. And we've had people go in there and ask where they can suggest a case.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is go to the hitchedtohomicide.com with a 2 in the middle, hitchedtohomicide.com. And then you'll see at the top of the menu a place where you can suggest a case. Go in there and send it off to us. We'd love to have a...
One of the things that keeps showing up are the Bless Your Heart segments.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know. I need to make a new tab. So maybe before this airs, I'll make a new tab for Bless Your Heart on its own.
Yep.
We need some shirts. I'm getting on all of that. We're going to have some fun with merchandise with Hitched to Homicide. I promise. If you've got a spouse or a significant other who you tell all your true crime stories to and make them crazy, it might be the spot for you.
Yeah.
But I am going to dive right into this. This is a big case.
Okay.
It's 20 years old. There's a reason why I picked it, because there's some new developments in the case. We'll get to those at the end.
Okay.
But before we get started, let me give you some sources. Vanity Fair Magazine, FBI.gov. I went there. Murderpedia.org. Deseret.com, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, the Discovery Channel's Deranged Killers, and Wikipedia.
Cool. Let's do it.
John Allen Williams is born in New Orleans, Louisiana on December 31st, 1960 to parents Ernest Edward Williams and Eva Ferris. When John is a baby, his mother is diagnosed with breast cancer, and by the time he's 3, his mom is dead, and he's being raised by his aunt and his grandfather in Baton Rouge.
Okay.
He grows up in Baton Rouge and graduates in 1978 from Scotlandville High School, and instead of college after high school, at 17 years old, John joins the Louisiana Army National Guard, where he will be until 1985. In 1981, he marries Carol Caglier, and these two have a baby that same year, a boy, and they name him Lindbergh, like Charles Lindbergh, or at least that's the way it's spelled.
Okay.
In the beginning, his military career seems very promising. John was personable. He was well-liked. He was outgoing. His commanders liked him. But by 1983, the cracks were beginning to show in John's character. Because in August of 1983, he hits a non-commissioned officer in the head and is fined $100 and is threatened with 22 days in solitude.
Wow.
He also gets into trouble for failing to report for duty. And in August of 1985, he is released from the Louisiana National Guard. And if you're in trouble with the National Guard, where would you go? Well, you enlist in the regular army. At this point, he's 25 years old.
So he wasn't a model soldier.
But yet he went ahead and enlists in the army.
Gotcha.
It's at the age of 25 he makes even more changes. He separates from his wife. He converts to Islam when he joins the U.S. Army. And he's going to be stationed in Washington State. He divorces Carol and remarries, and his new wife's name is Mildred Green. Now, together they're going to have 3 children. And while in the Army, John becomes a skilled marksman. He qualified as an expert with an M16, thus giving him the highest level of marksmanship for a typical soldier. And he's also a skilled auto mechanic. And he serves our nation proudly in Germany and in the Middle East during the Gulf War until 1990 with the 84th Engineer Company. Then from 1994, he briefly served in the Oregon National Guard because on April 26, 1994, at the age of 33, John is honorably discharged on a condition of anonymity.
What does that mean?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that question, and so I texted our good friend, retired Colonel Dave, and asked that question.
Colonel Dave.
Yeah. Colonel Dave, and I asked this very question, and he said he'd never heard of it before. His best guess is that condition of anonymity meant that he had been part of something that the DOD doesn't want to recognize.
Wonder what that could be.
Well, it's crazy because if you think about how this case ends up, what was he doing?
Yeah.
But he settles in Tacoma, Washington with his family.
Okay.
By 1997, John gets restless. He tries to start his own business twice. The first time as an auto mechanic and then a karate school.
Well, there's 2 completely related career choices.
You don't see the connect? I don't
Yeah.
understand it, honey.
When I grow up, I either want to be an auto
I'm going to
mechanic
own an auto mechanic store or a karate school.
a karate guy.
Yeah. But both business ventures fail. And in September of 1999, his second wife, Mildred, files for legal separation. And by December of 1999, she's filed for divorce. And a year after that, Mildred files a restraining order against John because he's threatening her.
Not a nice guy.
She actually told some friends that she was afraid for her life. She thought that he was going to kill her. And if he had the chance, he would kill her.
Wow.
Now, not long after the restraining order is issued, John goes to Antigua with his and Mildred's 3 children. He takes the children and leaves the United States, which you cannot do.
Right.
He takes 14-year-old John Jr., 12-year-old Selena, and 11-year-old Taliba. He's taking them all from Washington State as a last stand in their divorce and their custody battle.
Okay.
Now, when John and the children make it to Antigua, he was known by the locals as the runner, because people could find him every morning in shorts and athletic shoes running the hills of the island. And apparently nobody in Antigua runs just for the hell of it, just for the fun of it.
So no Olympic runners come from Antigua?
I'm sure they do, but I guess it's not like here where you see everybody, you're on your way to work and you see a ton of people out jogging or walking. It just didn't happen in the hills of Antigua. He's a 39-year-old man who's hiding from the United States authorities, and he's keeping his own backstory to the locals really vague. He tells people that he served in the Gulf War. He also claimed to have been a member of the Special Forces rather than a combat engineer and metal worker, which is what he really was. Or was he? Was he a part of Special Forces?
Yeah.
Hard to know.
Right.
He didn't say that he was John Williams at one point in his life, and he also didn't speak of his 2 failed marriages, the auto repair business that died back in Washington, or the karate school that failed, or the Army's suspicion that during the Gulf War he fragged the tent of a sergeant he had a run-in with.
Wait, what's frag mean?
Hang on, he tossed an incendiary grenade inside.
Jeez, this is a fun guy.
And I looked this up. Fragging is the deliberate killing or attempted killing of a soldier by a fellow soldier, usually a superior officer or non-commissioned officer. The word was coined by the U.S. military personnel during the Vietnam War, when such killings were most often attempted with a fragmentation grenade, sometimes making it appear as though the killing was accidental or during combat with the enemy. Fragging, that's where it comes from.
Gotcha.
And the term fragging is now often used to encompass any means used to deliberately and directly cause the death of military colleagues.
Okay.
So he never got charged with this. It was just suspected that he was the one who did this.
Right.
Now, the people on the island in Antigua think that John is a nice guy. He was recognized as someone who was really good with kids. He was really good with his own kids. He gave the children discipline, and they loved him for it. He wasn't harsh or unfair. It was always discipline mixed with love and care. And the locals also said that he had an amazing sense about him. He knew how to come into any room a stranger and leave as a friend. And people on the island really liked him.
Okay.
Also on the island of Antigua at this time is Lee Boyd Malvo. And here's his backstory. Lee's dad, Leslie Malvo, worked in a residential area of Kingston, Jamaica called the Red Hills, where he meets Una James. He thinks she's pretty. Una is 20. Leslie is in his late 30s. They begin seeing each other and move in together, and roughly 6 months after they move into the same house,
Let me guess.
baby Lee Boyd Malvo is born on February 18th, 1985. They rented a home in Kingston, and Leslie and Una remained unmarried. And apparently that's kind of a thing in Jamaica. It's, it's not that big of a deal. These two are really different. Leslie's a really relaxed and self-assured guy, and Lee's mother, Una, is very strict. She's a Christian. She's a perfectionist. She wants a lot for her son. Like, he wants to be a pilot, and she has said she wants him to be a doctor.
Okay.
Una leaves Leslie when Lee is 5 years old, but then she leaves Lee over and over, always looking for a better job and more money. So she leaves him and goes to the island of St. Martin to work as a maid, leaving him when he's 9 years old at the time with friends. And this is going to happen a lot. He goes from friends' homes to families' homes to friends' homes and back again. By the time Lee is 8, he has attended 7 different schools.
Wow. So he really doesn't have a mom.
He really doesn't have a mom or a dad.
Yeah.
By the time he's 15, he's attended 5 more. But everybody loves this kid. Everybody loves Lee. His teachers, his guidance counselors, they call him a model student. He wanted to do well. He was a people pleaser. That's called foreshadowing.
Dun, dun, dun.
But he was bounced from place to place, and his parents made him feel like he was of no importance. So this was a child who didn't feel loved, and that's also called foreshadowing. By the time Lee is about 15 years old, he's basically living alone in a single-room plywood shack without electricity or running water.
Wow.
And his mother had moved him from Jamaica to Antigua, and they had come over with a relative, and once they get there, she leaves him again. So his parents have just both more or less abandoned him.
Right.
And he's 15. They want him, just fend for yourself.
Good Lord.
So when Lee meets John, according to Lee, it happens in October of 2000 when he saw John and his son playing fight simulation games on a store computer.
Okay.
And after this, how they get together or become so close is pretty much unknown because Lee doesn't really talk about it and John never spoke about it. But one day, John turns up with Lee at a place called the Zaza Electronics store.
Okay.
And the guys that worked there were saying it was weird because all of a sudden, John turns up with Lee and he tells him that this is his son from the United States.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Lee, who has a Jamaican accent, is speaking with an American accent.
Okay.
So they're thinking these two have been together for a little while
Right.
because he's taught him how to
Sure.
speak with an American accent. Then Lee would stop by the store every day with John Jr., and they would play this flight simulator game and other games on the computers because remember, Lee told everybody he wanted to be a pilot.
Right.
But the guys in the electronics store, they think it's hinky. But nothing feels right about Lee. He didn't feel American. He was too reserved. And then one day as he's playing, he accidentally drops into a Jamaican accent and spoke in Jamaican Creole,
Oops.
saying, "That's mine." And when the guys in the electronics store ask him about it, they say, "You're not American." And Lee tells them, quote, "I was born in Jamaica, but my mother is American. She is married to John," end quote.
Okay.
And this is kind of true, not really, but fake true.
Right.
Or is that even a phrase, fake true? Here's why. Because by late autumn in the year 2000, John Muhammad had begun forging very realistic-looking U.S. immigration documents.
Uh-oh.
And soon everybody on the island knew that for between $1,000 and $3,000, depending on the service that's rendered, John Muhammad could provide anyone with all the necessary visas and work permits to get into the United States.
One-stop shopping.
There it is. It's December of 2000. He sells Una James the papers to get her into the United States, and he promises that there is all this prosperity waiting for her in Fort Myers, Florida.
Why Fort Myers?
I don't know. Fort Myers, Florida. And once again, she leaves her son behind, and she leaves him with John.
Right.
And now Lee Malvo is again all alone, and this time on an unfamiliar island without his aunts or his cousins or his friends. And it's kind of the setup for a perfect storm for Lee. He's got a history of repeated parental abandonment. He's a people pleaser. He's very obedient. And after his mom leaves him, any kind of supervision he had in Jamaica with family, when he got to Antigua, he got none of that. But he found something new. He found someone new, and that was John Muhammad.
I'm surprised at 15 years old, when he's actually living on his own, that he's not in more trouble.
He's a really good kid.
Yeah, I know. That's what's amazing.
He's a good kid. He was a good student. By January of 2001, Lee had moved in with John Muhammad and his son, John Jr., and his 2 daughters. And at the beginning of the year 2001, John Muhammad wants to see just how much he can change this little 15-year-old Lee Malvo. John converts Lee to Islam. He would make Lee work out with him every single day. They worked out constantly. John was giving his son and Lee both these tape recordings, which they were to listen to in bed at night. And on the tapes, after a long period of music to lull the kids to sleep, the readings were from several different sources, like self-help books, like Don't Sweat the Small Stuff.
And Don't Pet the Sweaty Stuff.
And Don't Pet the Sweaty Stuff. Very funny. But then that would move into Nation of Islam propaganda. Now, Lee's friends at school start to see a change in him. Before he met John, he was interested in sports and girls and games and school. But now he's arguing with the kids at school about Islam. And he's attending a Christian school, the Seventh-day Adventist school.
Okay.
He also tells everybody how interested he is in guns. And suddenly he knows a lot about guns. And I even saw a documentary where one of his school chums had said that they watched a movie and someone asked what gun they were using in the movie, and Lee pipes up and tells everybody exactly what kind of gun was used in the movie.
Obviously, he learned all this from John.
He's learning all this from John.
Gotcha.
Finally, Lee just stopped coming to school. Then, by the spring of 2001, John Muhammad's life is starting to catch up with him. People know that he's creating these false documents, and it's getting around.
Right.
And the immigration papers scam is talked about. And then there's talk about all of his custody problems. People are all up in his business.
Oh, yeah.
They're in the business.
Oh, yeah.
And at one point, John leaves Lee and his own children for several days and hides out on another part of the island because police came to St. John's, Antigua, looking to question him.
Oh, wow.
And John Muhammad knows it's time to change locations.
Yeah, time to yeet out of there.
So on May 24th, 2001, John, his children, and now 16-year-old Lee Malvo fly to Miami through San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Lee has forged American immigration documents. And I also read he had told other people on the island that he would take their children with him and coach them and love them so they could flourish in the, quote, rich soil of the United States, end quote. But the parents had said to John, no, thank you.
Well, there's a surprise.
So John gets Lee near his mother in Florida so they can reunite. And he takes his 3 biological children and he moves them all to Bellingham, Washington.
Wow, this guy's all over the place.
Well, remember when he was in the Army, he was stationed in Washington State.
Oh, okay. So he's got a connection.
He's got a connection there. Right.
All right.
In August, Lee enrolled himself as a junior at Cypress Lake High School. He wanted to fulfill his dreams. He wanted to go to college. He wanted to get an education. He wanted to become this commercial pilot. He told everybody that he wanted to fly people around the Caribbean in a plane. That's what he wanted to do. But in order to go to college, he had to take the SAT.
Sure.
And when you have to take the SAT, you need a United States Social Security number.
Right.
And that's something that Lee doesn't have because he's an illegal alien. So he doesn't have one.
I wish I didn't have a Social Security number when I took my SAT. Sorry. Just threw that in there.
So Lee's mom, Una, and Lee discussed the possibility of John Muhammad legally adopting Lee so he would become a U.S. citizen and would get a Social Security card.
Okay.
And after it's discussed, Una even buys Lee a ticket, a bus ticket to Washington State. But she changes her mind and she hides this ticket. But she doesn't hide it very well because one day in October, Lee takes the ticket and runs away. He wants to rejoin John Muhammad and his family in Bellingham, Washington.
Okay, so that was the reason she was trying to hide the ticket. She didn't want him back with
She hid
John?
it because she didn't want him to know that she'd bought a ticket for him. And then he found it and he was out of there.
Gotcha.
So he and his mom aren't getting along all that well. And he really wants to go to school. And if John's the ticket to going to college, he's going to go find John.
Gotcha.
He's going to go find this guy who is a father figure to him, who is really the only stable parental unit he's ever known. Now, John's dealing with his own demons and troubles in Washington with his children, because don't forget, Mildred has a no-fault divorce and full custody of their 3 children. And she got the court to issue a writ of habeas corpus for the children. And when John signed his kids up for public school in Bellingham in late August of 2001, their names on the enrollment roster were matched to the names on Mildred's writ. And a writ of habeas corpus, which literally means to produce the body, is a court order demanding that a public official deliver an individual to the court.
Gotcha.
So when they see that these are these kids that she's been looking for, they have to turn those names over.
Gotcha.
So John's been moving himself and his children from place to place, and they would stay in hotels, they would stay with friends, and he would get odd jobs just to get by. But when he enrolls them in school, the kids are picked up by local authorities and they give them back to their mother. They give them back to Mildred.
Okay.
And Mildred promptly and secretly relocates herself and her children. And she relocates to the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Now, for the next 4 months, John looks for his wife and his 4 children everywhere. And his friends say that this is the point where John cracked.
Uh-oh.
Where John lost his because according to other people, he basically had a nervous breakdown. He would spend all day just crying, and all he could think about was getting his children back.
Now, he's still in Washington State?
Yes.
Okay.
On October 20th, 2001, a month after Mildred disappears with the kids, Lee Malvo shows up at the Lighthouse Mission in Bellingham, Washington, where John had been staying on and off for the past couple of months.
Okay.
John introduces Lee to everyone as his son. And the Reverend Al Archer, who was the mission's director, who had also grown very fond of John, said that he knew that it wasn't John's son, but he didn't ask questions, and Lee didn't have a Jamaican accent, and he was speaking with an American accent. But the Reverend thinks it's all hinky.
Sure.
Don't try to pull one over on the right Reverend.
You can't punk the preacher.
On November 18th, 2001, Lee enrolls at Bellingham High School and begins to take classes. And every day after school, Lee and John lift weights at the YMCA. Then they would disappear for hours from the homeless shelter where they're living together. And they would go to the local gun range and the sportsman club, and they would calibrate the telescopic sight on a Bushmaster AR-15.
Wow, that's a serious gun.
And this is a gun that John Muhammad had somehow acquired, and apparently he carried it with him everywhere he went, inside a hard plastic case, inside a green duffel bag.
Wow.
Well, I'm thinking a guy that can forge documents to get people in the United States could probably get access to an AR-15.
And he did.
And he did.
These two also go to friends of Lee's, where Lee likes to play video games. And one of the video games that John really wanted Lee to be good at was called Ghost Recon. It's a sniper game where you kill people. And according to Lee, he would get lost in it. He would lose his emotions. He had no emotions while killing these people in this very emotionally gripping game.
Sure.
But John isn't really letting Lee out of his sight. They're always together. They're always alone. And John is very controlling of everything that Lee does. And apparently, Lee wouldn't even speak unless John gave him a nod, like a signal that it was okay to speak.
Wow.
And now the tapes that John is having Lee listen to every night falling asleep, they've taken a very dark turn. And instead of self-help books sprinkled with the Nation of Islam writings, the tapes were now introducing Lee into a contained, aggressive, vengeful vision of the world.
So he basically is getting subconscious
Yeah.
messages when he's asleep.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. And the world, this vengeful vision of the world, it was a world that was filled with racial hate, lots of speeches by Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan.
Okay.
And John is basically telling Lee that powerful white America hates blacks and that the white man's design, prison, is where nearly all black men in America finally end up. And that black men not in prison are eventually forced into the army where they are easily sacrificed for the goals and needs of, once again, white America.
Wow.
John is controlling everything in Lee's life, from his exercise to his diet to what he's thinking. And a psychologist called this a disassociative state. It's where a person can be made to do things that an otherwise rational person would never do. Think Jim Jones and Heaven's Gate.
Sure.
Like brainwashing, right? Now, at least Mom back in Florida is looking for him. And she finally catches up with her son on December 14th of 2001. She calls. But she talks to John and not her son, Lee. And when she says, "You've kidnapped my son," John says to her, quote, "Yeah, I have a job to do, and I can't rely on some cokehead to do it," end quote.
Okay.
Lee's mom gets on the next bus and heads straight to Washington. She's going to get her kid back. And when she arrives at the mission home and says, "I'm Lee Malvo's mother," the Reverend Archer thinks, I'm finally going to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to get some truth. And the Reverend takes Una to the police in Bellingham, and she tells the whole story to the cops. She tells police, quote, "Unless you stop John Muhammad, you're going to have another September 11th on your hands."
Oh, wow.
End quote.
Wow.
And the police take Lee from the mission and hand him back over to his mother. But all this time, John has been filling Lee's head with all this propaganda, and he's been teaching him how to shoot without feeling or emotion. He's been training his own little soldier.
Not good.
Then Lee and Una are taken into custody by immigration officials on December 19th of 2001 for being in the country illegally.
Right.
And the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service border guards are tipped off by the local police who see something weird in their immigration papers when they're at the police station. So that's how that goes down.
All right.
And for more than a month, Una is kept in INS detention, and Lee lived in a juvenile facility in Seattle, Washington. But they're released on January 23rd, 2002, to a safe house. And while waiting for a hearing, Lee runs away from his mother, and he looks in every YMCA, every friend's house, every shooting range until he finds John Muhammad. He was looking for his, quote, father.
Wow. It's like a drug.
So no mother, no school, no rules at the mission house. John has Lee, and he's training him to be a killer. And there's a written daily schedule that John draws up that Lee never questions. Lots of daily exercise. There was also daily training missions. They would hunt each other sniper style on a local Indian reservation or a nearby forest.
Wow.
John had 2 rules for Lee. Whatever it takes, and there's no turning back.
Whoa.
John taught Lee how to overcome interrogation, and at one point, he chained Lee to a tree for hours in the snow to mentally harden him.
Good Lord.
Apparently, John wanted to teach Lee that he was indestructible.
Wow.
And then it begins. So here we go, people.
Hang on and keep your hands inside the car.
On February 16th, 2002, it's just 2 days before Lee's 17th birthday, John gives Lee his first big test. A woman named Isa Nichols had helped John's wife Mildred in the early days of the custody battle with his children. Isa Nichols had been John's bookkeeper for the failed auto repair shop, and she had helped Mildred and the children hide from John. And she sat next to Mildred in court when the custody battle was taking place.
Okay.
John wanted Isa dead.
Wow.
So he gives this task to Lee as a test. But what John didn't know was that living in Isa's home was her 21-year-old niece, Kenya Nicole Cook. Now, Kenya was born on March 11th, 1981. She was 20 years old and worked as a cashier at Fashion Bug. Now, Kenya is in Isa's home with her 6-month-old baby girl, Angelia Rogers, because she's in an abusive relationship and she is seeking safe haven at her aunt's house.
All right.
But what she gets is the exact opposite. That night, February 16th, Lee is carrying a .45 caliber pistol that was borrowed from a shooting range friend of John's. Lee goes to Isis's home on Tacoma Street to kill the woman who answers the door. But on that night, the only person at the home was Kenya and her 6-month-old baby.
No.
She's in the middle of changing the baby's diaper when the doorbell rings. She answers the door and is shot in the face with a single bullet.
Wow.
According to Lee, this was his rite of passage. This was his test of readiness. Now, after the murder of Kenya, these two bounce around the United States a lot. They do this a lot. They traveled by bus. They lived in shelters. They started murdering people to fulfill their needs and or desires.
Wow.
And these are some, but not all, because it's believed that there are others that are dead because of them, but have never been connected to Lee or John.
Sad.
March 19th, Tucson, Arizona. 60-year-old Jerry Taylor is on the Fred Enke golf course practicing his chip shots. Jerry was married, a salesman. He had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. As Jerry retrieves his golf balls, Lee fires a single shot to the chest, killing Jerry. They dragged his body into the nearby brush. August 1st, 2002, 8:20 p.m., John Gatta pulls into a Hammond, Louisiana mall, just about 40 miles east of Baton Rouge. It's almost closing time, and John rushes into Sears to buy a new pair of shoes. And while he's in there, either Lee or John slashes one of his tires. Now, right after 9 p.m., John returns to his truck and starts it up, and then he realizes he has a flat tire. He pulls under a streetlight in the mall parking lot and begins to change it. And John and Lee approach him and ask him if the mall is still open, and John says that some of the stores are still open, and the two of them walk away, but they return about 5 minutes later. They say something to the effect of, quote, "It looks like you have a flat tire," and they're kind of laughing as they walk off again, and John doesn't see them for several other minutes until he gets to the bed of his Chevy Silverado to get the spare tire. And that's when he sees a shadow slinking along the side of his truck, and he looks closer and sees a figure dart from the front of the truck. He thinks it's a bunch of kids playing a prank, and he says, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Lee Malvo comes around to the side of the door. He makes eye contact with John Gatta and produces a .22 caliber revolver and shoots him from a distance of about 5 feet. He had a smirk on his face like, "I'm going to kill you." The bullet pierced John Gatta's neck and exited his back just below his shoulder. John Mohammed and Lee Malvo run away, and then John Gatto runs to a service station. He wasn't in much pain and thought it could be a prank, and actually told a witness at the service station that he thought he'd been hit with a paintball gun.
Oh, wow.
And when John Gatta gets to the hospital, doctors tell him that he dodged damage to his spine and arteries.
Jeez.
Dodged a bullet, even though he took a bullet.
Wow.
He was released in an hour and was one of the most fortunate of John and Lee's victims.
Man, lucky guy.
That's when you need to go out and buy a lottery ticket.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've been hit with a paintball gun. And they're like, "No, dude, you're bleeding."
Yeah.
I mean, I even read that in one of the articles. The guy was like, "No, that's not a paintball gun. You're bleeding."
Yeah.
September 5th, 2002, Clinton, Maryland. This is Mildred Muhammad's hometown. John and Lee stake out an Italian restaurant called Margellina. Every night, the owner, Paul LaRuffa, would close the restaurant around 10 p.m. and walk to his car. John and Lee watched him for 2 nights. On the 3rd night, Paul put his laptop and a briefcase with roughly $3,500 in the backseat of his car. As soon as he gets behind the wheel, Lee walks up and shoots Paul 5 times before taking the briefcase and his computer.
Wow.
Quote, "Before I could start the car or do anything, the window next to me just exploded and shattered glass all over me with the first shot and deafened my left ear. And the rest of the shots came in and they all hit me. It was mind-boggling. Your world changes in a split second. So I raised up in the seat after it was quiet and I realized I was bleeding and I held my hand over my chest. I opened the door and got to my feet and got out and hoped someone was there. One of the people I left with was there walking towards me. He dialed 911 on his cell phone. They took me to the trauma center. I made it there in time and they saved my life."
Good
End
Lord.
quote.
5 times and he lived?
And he lived.
Jeez.
But now these two have money. $3,500 to be exact.
Yeah.
And on September 10th, 5 days after shooting Paul LaRuffa, they buy a 1990 blue Chevy Caprice in Trenton, New Jersey.
Going uptown.
The name of the used car dealership? Sure Shot Auto Sales. How unfortunate is that? How unfortunate is that? So now these two have money and they have wheels. And here's what they've done. They've modified this car so that Lee can climb into the trunk from the back seat. And through a small hole just to the right of the trunk's lock, he could size up his target and shoot from long range.
Wow.
And after he shoots, then John could drive away immediately.
Jeez.
September 14th, Silver Springs, Maryland. An employee at Hillendale Beer and Wine, Rupinder Benny Obori, he's aged 22. And Benny, I'm sorry if I messed up your name. He is wounded inside the Hillendale Beer and Wine shop by a shot fired from outside the store. And later, the owner of the liquor store will say that an employee of the neighboring Safeway store saw the blue Chevy Caprice leave the shopping center parking lot on the day of the shooting. Benny is wounded, but he's not killed.
Okay.
A day later, September 15th, 2002, they go to another liquor store. Muhammad Rashid is locking up for the night when he turns and sees Lee Malvo walking toward him. He never asks for money. He doesn't make any demands. He shoots Muhammad in the stomach without warning and steals his wallet as he lays bleeding on the sidewalk. Muhammad does survive.
Wow.
September 20th, 2002, Million Voldemarian, age 41, is killed after being shot 3 times with a .22 caliber handgun outside a liquor store in Atlanta, Georgia. Million is an Ethiopian immigrant who was helping out at his friend's store. No good deed goes unpunished. He's just there helping out a friend.
Yeah.
Shortly after midnight, he walks out of the store and is shot 3 times. He told his friend, the owner, that he'd seen a suspicious car outside the store earlier when he'd gone out to his car to get something. The next day, September 21st, 2002, just a few hours' drive from Atlanta and Montgomery, Alabama, the ABC liquor store on Zelda Road. It's 8:30 p.m. A bullet from a Bushmaster .223 rifle tears through Claudine Parker's chest, killing her almost instantly. Claudine was a very proud aunt to a nephew, Roman Harper, the son of her sister, Princess Harper. Roman would go on to be an Alabama football star and also played on the New Orleans Saints 2010 Super Bowl team.
Oh, wow.
She was the aunt that never missed a game.
Wow.
She was that aunt. 24-year-old Kelly Adams was a wife. Her husband is Lynn, and she's mother to a 16-month-old baby girl, Brenda. Kelly is also shot. She's shot in the face and neck and severely wounded. Kelly would undergo 30 surgeries and would be dependent upon a tracheostomy tube for 3 years before she could even heal. And as you might imagine, she suffered from PTSD and continues to struggle to this day with what happened. God love her heart.
Yeah.
But at this crime scene, a magazine is dropped, like a paper magazine inside the store.
Oh, not a gun magazine, a paper magazine.
Paper magazine is dropped inside the liquor store.
Okay.
Because before the shooting took place, Lee was inside the liquor store and was looking at this magazine, and he dropped it in the floor.
I bet there's fingerprints on it.
It was picked up as evidence.
There you go.
But this is Montgomery, Alabama. Okay? Just remember that. They're in Montgomery.
Sure.
I'll remember that.
2 days later, on September 23rd, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 45-year-old Hong M. Ballinger is getting into her car after work. Hong was born on June 28, 1957 in South Korea. She is the store manager of a beauty supply store, Beauty Depot. She is wife to Jim Ballinger and mother to an 11-year-old son, Joshua. Hong was what her husband called a daughter of God. She was deeply religious and a member of the Korean Central Church in Baton Rouge.
Okay.
Hong had met Jim, her husband, in Korea when he and a Korean army buddy were attending a Korean movie. She joined them and wound up slapping her future husband when he was too forward. Ballinger tells this story. He's chuckling when he tells this story.
It was a match made in heaven.
Yeah. He was a wise guy, GI, who had grown up in Iowa, where his father ran a bowling alley.
Okay.
Hong later told him that if he wanted to date her, he needed to start attending church, something that he had not done in years. And so he did go to church, and then they were married in 1983 and moved to the United States in 1985. She was his salvation.
Gotcha.
According to him, she was his salvation. As she made her way to the car around 6:30 p.m. that night, she was shot in the back of the neck, which severed the major blood vessels near her throat.
Oh,
She was also robbed of the store's daily receipts.
wow.
Now, while murdering in Baton Rouge, Lee and John are staying with John's sister, Carol Williams. And it's then that John tells his sister that they were going to, quote, extort $10 million from the U.S. government by randomly killing people in and around Washington, D.C., and they were going to use this money to change the world. They would buy a big compound in Canada or Africa and start a utopian community of 70 black girls and 70 black boys. All of them would be educated in the proper ways of Islam and honor, and then upon maturity, they would go back into the world to change it for the better, end quote.
But first, we got to kill a bunch of people.
But first, we're going to kill people.
Gee. Okay.
But was that really the plan? Maybe. More likely, and something that John Muhammad never said to Lee, that the plan was really to kill Mildred Muhammad.
Oh.
She would be the last victim thrown in with all the others. And then he wouldn't be caught and the children would be his.
Right.
Because according to John's friend Robert Holmes, a man whose couch he slept on a lot, the $10 million in the Utopian Society was a sidebar that came later. He said, quote, maybe they were riding along in the car and a light went off in John's head and he realized maybe we can get paid to stop. But the bigger plan, I think, was always to kill Mildred, end quote.
Right.
And there are a lot of people who think that that was the real plan, was just to kill Mildred.
So was he just killing all these other people? So
it would seem random that his wife was dead too.
Yeah, okay. All right. Gotcha.
Now, witnesses living in Mildred Muhammad's neighborhood in Clinton, Maryland, recall seeing the blue 1990 Chevy Caprice near her house on several occasions. And a friend of Lee and John has said that Lee Malvo admitted to her that he and John knew where Mildred lived. And a friend had found her address on the internet and that they had staked out the house on numerous occasions.
Uh-oh.
So they're watching her.
Yep.
But for Lee, he's now killed or wounded all these people.
Right.
And his leader, his, quote, father, has this elaborate blueprint for this perfect world, something that Lee never had. And later we're going to find out that Lee was really wrestling with everything that he was doing.
Because he's a good kid.
Yeah.
Or he was a good kid.
He wants to be a good kid, but he's a people pleaser. And now he's just fallen under the spell of John.
He's been brainwashed.
Yes. And according to Lee's psychiatrist, Dr. Dewey Cornell, quote, when John wasn't there, he could still be somewhat self-directed, meaning Lee. But in John's presence, he would do what he was supposed to do. So far as he explained to me, he'd gotten through the murders and robberies by what he called, quote, zoning out, end quote, displacing his emotions, a desensitization he'd been practicing for months, end quote. So all the chaining him to a tree and all the workouts and, you know, he would deprive him of food and all kinds of stuff. That was him preparing him for all of this.
Yeah, a very radical, warped kind of military training and direction.
Right. And Lee tells Dr. Cornell that while all this was going on, he was searching for another way out of this predicament. And he was actually suicidal. He had taken a handgun and gone into the bathroom at Carol Williams' house, John's sister's house in Baton Rouge, and tried to pull the trigger, but he couldn't do it.
Wow.
And according to the Washington Post and other papers, Lee wrote a desperate suicide-style note to an acquaintance, 17-year-old Latoria Williams, who is Muhammad's niece, in which he described himself as, quote, a walking time bomb. Was my purpose here on the God-forsaken planet to be banned, shamed, and disapproved? Why am I here? I've had a hard life, believe it or not. No father and a mother who hates. No, that's an understatement. She has disbarred me from her. And I have a father, John Muhammad, who I know is going to have me kill for a righteous society to prevail, end quote.
Wow. Just desperation.
Yeah. So then the killings start in D.C. So I wanted to give you all the other shootings beforehand because you really only ever hear about the victims that are in and around D.C. because they're called the D.C. snipers.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I always knew was just the D.C. sniper.
But they killed all these people or wounded all these people up to this point.
Wow.
And here's where it begins in the Washington, D.C. area. October 2nd, 2002, 5:20 p.m. The window is shot out at a Michael's craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. No one is hurt. Less than an hour later, at 6:04 p.m., 55-year-old James Darrell Martin of Silver Springs, Maryland, has gone to the Shoppers Food Warehouse in Wheaton to purchase groceries for his church's youth group that night.
Okay.
James was born on May 7th, 1947 in St. Louis, Missouri. He was a 1969 business graduate of the Southeast Missouri State University and was a veteran employed as a program manager for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of Marine and Aviation Operations.
Say that 10 times fast.
So is that NOMA?
I'm going to say yes.
Sounds like it. Maybe.
Yeah.
He volunteered at the Shepherd Elementary School in Washington, D.C., judging their science fair and speaking with their Parent-Teacher Association and arranging for computer donations. He was a resident of Silver Springs, Maryland. He was a husband and a father, a Boy Scout leader for his 11-year-old son's troop, and a church trustee. He was a Civil War buff and an amateur genealogist, and he actively researched his wife's Civil War ancestors and his own Missouri roots. And if you're new to the podcast, I always like to give background on all the victims because we talk about how they were killed, but we don't necessarily talk about how they lived.
Right.
So we always want to talk about how they lived, not just how they died. James is shot through the heart, one shot, as he's standing by his car. A woman calls 911 while she shields her 5-year-old child in her arms. And a police officer hears the shot ring out and is immediately on the scene. So he's close enough that he hears the shot.
Right.
He's immediately on the scene. The police have no clue who could have wanted a man like James dead. There are no bullet casings. There is no evidence. There is nothing. The next morning, October 3rd, 7:41 a.m., James Lynn Sonny Buchanan is cutting grass at a car dealership in White Flint, Maryland. He's done landscaping work in the area since he was in junior high. Sonny was born in Bethesda and grew up in Gaithersburg. He was a 1981 graduate of Gaithersburg High School and a 1986 business law graduate of the University of Maryland. Since the 1990s, he had owned and operated True Colors, a lawn design business. He was a former board member of the Montgomery County Crime Solvers, through which people can provide anonymous tips about crime.
That's ironic.
Exactly, and the Montgomery County Police Boys and Girls Club in Silver Springs. He offered landscape services for crime solver events, such as providing mums for fundraising.
Wow.
He also tutored at the Boys and Girls Club and showed children how to plant flowers.
What a guy.
Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
While he's mowing the grass, a .223 caliber Bushmaster AR-15 fires from a blue 1990 Chevy Caprice that is parked a few hundred yards up the street.
Wow.
A few hundred yards up the street. Sonny is hit in the chest. He stumbled toward the building before collapsing as dozens of employees run toward him. And the service director, Al Briggs, told the Washington Post, quote, "I just put my hand on his shoulder and said, 'Help is on the way.' But he was already gone," end quote.
Wow.
The shot to the chest left a wound the size of a baseball.
Jeez.
Sonny was 39 and the son of a retired Montgomery County police officer. And after his death, his two sisters established Sonny's Kids, which is an educational fund for underprivileged children. All of these people are so special.
Yeah.
And they're just randomly mowed down, just randomly murdered.
They just got up that morning and went to do what they were going to do and had no idea that.
Yeah. By 8:12 the same morning, Lee and John had another victim. Taxi driver Prem Kumar Wakelar of Olney, Maryland. Prem was born on September 13th, 1948 in Pune, India. At the age of 18, he immigrated to the D.C. area to study at Montgomery College. He sent funds back to India all the time and helped his siblings immigrate to the United States. After he retired from a magazine business, he worked part-time as a cab driver. He was just staying busy. But he was planning on retiring soon, and he wanted to return to India. And per Indian tradition, his brother selected his bride.
Nice.
Her name was Margaret, and she was an obstetrics nurse. They had a son, Andrew, and a daughter, Andrea. On October 3rd, he left for work extra early, intending to take part of the day to celebrate the beautiful weather they were having at that time. He stops that morning at a mobile gas station to fill up his taxi in Aspen Hill, Maryland, and to get a pack of gum and a lottery ticket. And while filling up the car, he is shot in the chest.
Jeez.
He staggers toward Dr. Caroline Namro, who's a pediatrician who's at the gas station filling up her own car. And his last words to her were, quote, "Call an ambulance," end quote. And then he leaned up against her minivan and collapsed. And Dr. Namro feels for a pulse. She tells him that he's going to be all right. She starts CPR. But Prem is dead before the ambulance can arrive. There are no shell casings. There are no clues.
Wow.
8:37 a.m., 25 minutes later.
Jeez.
Sarah Ramos is sitting on a bench reading a book outside a Silver Springs post office. She's waiting for her ride. She was born in 1968 in El Salvador, where she had been a law student in her home country, and her husband, Carlos Cruz, was a professor. But they came to the United States with the promise of a better life for their 7-year-old son. Sarah was a nanny and a housekeeper, and she's waiting for her client to pick her up for the day.
Okay.
She belonged to several church groups. She was a very private person. She was a very cheerful and loving woman dedicated to her child, her family, her church, and her friends. But as she sat on the bench between the post office and a chicken restaurant right behind her, a bullet from a high-powered rifle passed through her head and pierced the window of the chicken place.
Jeez.
She was killed instantly. Her purse sat beside her. Her legs were crossed. She had a book in her hand.
Wow.
There were no clues. There was no evidence.
Wow.
Now, as you might imagine, the police are losing their
Oh, yeah.
at this point.
Good Lord.
Last night, James Martin is killed in the grocery store parking lot, and the next morning, Sonny Buchanan, Prem Kumar Wakelar, and Sarah Ramos, all dead before 9 a.m.
Man.
But they're not done. At 9:58 a.m., Lori Ann Lewis Rivera is vacuuming out her minivan at a Shell station in Kensington, Maryland. Lori was born on May 4th, 1977 in Urbana, Champaign, Illinois, moving to Mountain Home, Idaho in 1982 with her family. When she's still in junior high, she decides that she wants to be a professional nanny.
Nice.
And in 1996, she actually went to nanny school.
I didn't know there was a nanny
I
school.
didn't either, but she graduated from Northwest Nannies Institute.
The University of Nanny.
Yep. After she was hired by a district journalist as the live-in nanny in Washington, D.C., and she relocated to Northern Virginia to assume her duties. So she's taken on a high-profile nanny job. Within months, she began attending a nearby Mormon church, and there she got to know Nelson Rivera, a landscaper from Honduras. They married in 1997. 2 years later, she gave birth to Joycelyn. The couple began saving for a house. They'd bought a minivan. Things were going really well. She loved children, and her little girl was the light of her life. Her family back home in Idaho and her husband and daughter, they were everything to her. And while Lori is vacuuming out Cheerios from the back seat of her minivan, she is gunned down.
Jeez.
Now, police have been told by an eyewitness, or maybe it wasn't an eyewitness, because the force is pretty daggone bamboozled at this point. I mean, they don't know whether they found their rope or lost their cow kind of thing. But police have been told that they should be looking for a white van. A white van, not a 1990 blue Chevy Caprice.
Where'd the white van come
Somebody saw a white van, and these eyewitnesses, they're trying to help, but who they're helping is Lee and John.
Yeah.
Now, they have the bodies, and so they have bullets from the murders. So they know it's a high-powered rifle that a sniper would use, this Bushmaster.
Right.
It's a bullet that goes in small and comes out big.
Yep.
It's meant to kill.
Right.
So the police snipers go to these locations where these people have been gunned down, and they try to figure out the who, what, when, where. You know, they're trying to like put themselves in the position of being the sniper.
Right.
Where did this happen? Where did they go? From what angle? Then that same night, October 3rd at 9:15 p.m., 72-year-old Pascal Charlot of Washington, D.C. is walking to the bus station. He was born on April 20th, 1930 in Haiti. He immigrated to the United States in 1964, and he had lived in the Pentworth neighborhood for 30 years with his wife and 3 children. He was tall and grandfatherly with a wide smile. Pascal was well known in the Haitian community. He was a father of 5 and a skilled handyman who would help his neighbors with rehabs free of charge.
Jeez.
He loved gardening and was known for his tomatoes and peppers.
I like him.
2 years before, his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he was her caretaker.
Okay.
And after dinner that night, he headed out, telling a neighbor he was on the way to a drugstore. At 9:15 p.m., standing at an intersection near the Montgomery County line, he was fatally shot in the neck. Now, at this point, 6 people have been murdered by a sniper in the D.C. area in the span of 1 day and a half, 1.5 days.
Okay, so at this point, do people in D.C., do they know about this? I mean,
Yes.
is this widespread panic
Yes.
time? Or?
So the media is all over this.
Okay.
And people are starting to be afraid.
Gotcha.
But they're really going to get afraid because it just keeps continuing. But police think that since this is just 1 year after 9/11, and it's D.C. where they had 6 people die in the anthrax killings, that this could be Al-Qaeda. But other than the white van, they got nothing.
Yeah.
And they really have less than nothing because they're looking for a van that's the wrong vehicle.
Yeah.
October 4th, 2:30 p.m., Caroline Sewell is shot in the parking lot of a Michael's craft store in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She hears a sound at the same time she feels a pain in her back. A bullet pierces her lower back and exits through her chest. The bullet comes to rest in her Toyota minivan. Caroline was a stay-at-home mom of 2 who had gone to Michael's to buy a scarecrow and a wreath. She knew immediately that she had been shot. She prayed, asking for God not to let her die. And then she tells someone in the parking lot that she's been shot. But the man that she says, "I've been shot," he didn't believe her.
Oh,
He did not believe her.
if somebody tells you they're shot,
Please believe them.
yeah, it's probably
Please
good-
believe
yeah,
them.
whatever.
But employees of Michael's craft store, they come running out to assist her. They called 911. They placed foam pillows under her head. And she said she had difficulty breathing, but managed to tell those who came out to help her where her cell phone was because she wanted to call her husband because she didn't want him to worry and she wanted to make sure the children would be taken care of. Moms are super women.
Yep.
She's the mom. She was a mom from the beginning.
Yep.
Right then, she was like, I got to call my husband. I got to make sure the kids are taken care of.
Yeah.
She sustained 2 broken ribs, a damaged lung and diaphragm in the shooting, but Caroline survived.
Good.
Now, by this time, Police Chief Charles Moose is asking the public for help. If you've seen anything, if you know anything,
Right.
we need to know. And the FBI is now on the case too. And they've set up a tip line. If you know anything, if you see anything, call this number. They get over 100,000 tips.
Wow.
100,000 calls. And what police and the FBI do know is that they're dealing with a highly skilled shooter, someone with a high kill rate,
Right.
a skilled hunter, a military person, or a police officer who has long-range rifle sniper ability. And that's not, it's hard
Yeah.
to find that person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's one
not-
of those people.
And it's not Lee.
Wait, what do you mean it's not Lee?
Well, he's not a military. He's not a hunter. He's
Oh,
not.
right.
Yeah.
He's also 17 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they're looking in all
Not
the wrong places.
All the wrong places. Looking for love in all the wrong
Yeah.
places. Exactly. And the killer could be anywhere. They talked about closing schools, but they didn't. They canceled recess. They closed the blinds in the school. Nobody wanted to stop and get gas or go out into a parking lot
Right.
anywhere. There was no rhyme or reason for any of the killings. The victims were black, white, they were Hispanic, they were female, they were male, they were Indian. It was all over the board.
Sure.
October 7th, 2002, 5 days after the shooting spree begins, Iron Brown is a 13-year-old boy going into Benjamin Tasker Middle School early. Worst nightmare. Here it is.
Yeah.
His aunt is dropping him off in Bowie, Maryland. He gets out of the car, he puts down his book bag, and as soon as he does, he's shot. Now, after being hit, his aunt sees him turn around and he's bleeding. She's a nurse. He calls out to his aunt and says, quote, "I've been shot,"
Wow.
end quote. She drags him into her car and drives him herself to the hospital. And while on the road, she calls 911 and tells them what she's doing. And in the background of this 911 call, you can hear Iran crying. He's screaming in the background of the 911 call.
Wow.
And she says to him, "You are not going to die." Dr. Martin Eichelberger, the doctor at Children's Hospital in Washington, who later operated on him, said he removed the spleen and parts of his liver and pancreas, but the bullet that entered Brown's left chest missed his heart and lungs. And I've seen an interview with the doctor who said, quote, "He was trying to die, but we weren't going to let him," end quote. He'd lost a tremendous amount of blood, and it was his aunt, Tanya Brown's smart decision to take him to the hospital herself instead of waiting for the EMS that helped to save his life.
Wow.
Quick thinking.
Yep.
And she's so calm in this 911 call because she's telling him what's happening and she's driving at the same time and she's getting to the hospital.
Well, she's a medical professional.
She's a Wonder Woman, another Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
So now not only have adults died, but they've tried to murder a child. A
Right.
13-year-old kid has been shot.
Now you've done it.
Now you've done it. But Iron Brown would survive. Police and FBI go to the wooded area behind the school, and they do what's called a forensic walkthrough. They are like shoulder to shoulder walking through this area so that nothing is missed.
Right.
And they see an area where the grass is flat, and they use a metal rake to look for anything. And what they get is the shell casing and a pen barrel with the ink cartridge removed. It all goes to a lab. They're looking for DNA. What they also find is a tarot card.
Really?
The death card.
Mm-mm.
It's tacked to a tree, and on the back of the card, something is written. Quote, "For you, Mr. Police, code call me God. Do not release to the press." End quote. I do have a photo of it. I'll post it in the In-Laws and Outlaws.
They're getting cocky.
Yes. Now, when a child is shot, after Iran is shot, Police Chief Moose goes on TV, and while he's giving this press conference, he starts to cry.
Oh, wow.
And the task force wanted to honor their request. They wanted to say, okay, we won't release this tarot card to the press that this has happened.
Right.
And it's code call me God, because they want to establish communication with the killers. They think this is crucial. It's a crucial point in the investigation. But the media was everywhere, and no secret was safe.
Right.
And the police were determined to keep the tarot card evidence away from the press. But it got leaked, and it ended up on the front page of the Washington Post the next day.
I wonder why he didn't want it released.
Why didn't Lee and John want it released?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe they're establishing trust with the police force or with the FBI.
Okay.
Yeah, this is us. Don't release this to the press.
Right.
But it got released to the press.
Right.
And it was on the front page. And I get it. I mean, it's understandable. The press wanted to get a big story. That kind of reporting wins prizes, but it's also devastating to the case.
Sure.
2 days later, October 9th, 8:15 p.m., 53-year-old Dean Harold Myers is getting gas at a station in Manassas, Virginia. Dean was a native of Obelisk, Pennsylvania. He loved old cars, a hobby that he shared with his father and brothers. To avoid the draft, he enlisted in the Army and was sent to South Vietnam in May of 1969. He received the Purple Heart for wounds received in hostile action on March 8, 1970, and a permanent disability for the same. And although he spent over a year in recovery, he graduated with a civil engineer degree from Penn State in 1975.
Well, good for him.
He relocated to Northern Virginia to work in the field. He never married. He was an active uncle to his brothers and his friends' children, and a longtime sponsor to several children through World Vision, which was an anti-poverty mission. He loved the outdoors. That night, Dean drove his Mazda Protege into the Sunoco gas station in Manassas. He pumped and paid for his gas, and just as he was finishing up, he was shot in the head and killed instantly. 2 days later, October 11th, 9:30 a.m., Kenneth Bridges is in the D.C. area on business. Kenneth grew up in Detroit, Michigan. He graduated from Hillsdale College in Michigan in 1971 and from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business in 1973. He worked as an executive in Scott Paper Company, but to the surprise of many, he left the corporation in 1980. He was the co-founder of the president of MATAH, MATA Network, an organization formed in 1997 to encourage African Americans to support Black-owned businesses.
Okay.
He was in Virginia on business. He was a resident of Germantown, a neighborhood of Philadelphia, and he was a dedicated family man and was often found playing basketball with his wife and 6 children.
He's got his own team.
He's got a whole team and one to sit on the bench. Yeah.
Yeah, and a sub.
He called his wife from the road. He was getting gas and making a restroom break before getting back on the road to come home. And as Kenneth pumped gas into his car across the street, a state trooper was investigating a traffic accident.
Okay.
So there's a traffic accident across the street, state troopers there. Kenneth is pumping gas. He's 50 yards away. This police officer is 50 yards away when Kenneth is shot in the back.
Wow.
He's dead immediately from a .223 caliber high-powered Bushmaster rifle.
Right.
It's the same thing all over again.
Well, wait. Did the police officer hear the shot? Did
He hears the shot.
But he didn't see where it came from?
Didn't see where it came from.
Okay.
But what does that say? They can see this police officer. They got some balls.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's a cop right there.
50 yards away.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
October 14th, 3 days later, 9:15 p.m. 47-year-old Linda Gale Moore Franklin is loading her car with her purchases from the Home Depot in Falls Church, Virginia. Alongside her is her husband, William. Linda was born on March 11th, 1955, in Columbus, Indiana, Bartholomew County. I actually know exactly where that is. She's a 1986 education graduate of the University of Florida, go SEC. She taught in schools in Guatemala, Germany, Belgium, and Japan as a Department of Defense employee. She joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1998, studying terror threats while assigned to the National Infrastructure Protection Center.
Okay.
She was a breast cancer survivor, and she was married and the mother of a grown son and daughter and expecting her first grandchild.
No.
She had gone to the back of her car to open the trunk to make sure the cart didn't roll away, and her husband heard a loud noise and thought it was wood smacking the concrete, and he felt something hit the side of his face. It was Linda's blood. She'd been shot in the head, and the right side of her face is now gone.
Jeez.
Another witness comes forward and says that he saw a white minivan.
Oh, no.
He comes forward and says he sees a white minivan in this Home Depot parking lot. But this guy is only looking for media attention because after they find out who the guy is, they research a little bit more, and then they pull the surveillance footage of the parking lot, and they realize this guy showed up like 5 minutes after the shot happened.
Idiot.
Yeah. So he's only looking for media attention.
Yeah.
But once again, people are helping out Lee and John.
They're laughing behind the scenes.
And not the investigation.
Yeah.
But he's not the only guy who's looking for attention because this hotline, like I said, is getting 100,000 calls, all kinds of tips, including one from Tacoma, Washington, Robert Holmes. Robert was a friend of John Muhammad back in Washington State. And Robert is watching this sniper situation unfold on national TV, and he thinks to himself, I think this might be my friend, John Muhammad, doing this. He might be behind all of this.
Right.
He knows that John has an estranged wife that lives in D.C., but when Robert calls into the hotline, his call gets lost in all these other calls, and no one follows up with him or calls him back to ask more questions. Not only that, John and Lee themselves call into the hotline.
What?
And this is what they say, quote, "Good morning, don't say anything, just listen. We are the people that are causing the killing in your area. Look on the tarot card. It says, call me God," end quote. And somehow the person on the other end of this line is really confused about what they're trying to say to them and what Lee and John are trying to tell her. And she says, quote, "Sir, anything for you. That's Montgomery County Police hotline. We're not investigating the crime. Would you like that number?" And they hang up.
That's unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. 2 days later, October 19th, 8 p.m., Ashland, Virginia. Jeff Hopper is leaving the Ponderosa Steakhouse with his wife. They're walking hand in hand. I read this and it made me think of you because Rob always holds my hand when we leave someplace to take me to the car, and he always opens my door for me. And we have actually had people stop and say, "I love it that I got to watch you open the car door for your wife." And I'm like, yeah, he always does it. He's a Southern gentleman. But that's what, when I read this, I thought about us because they're leaving. Not that we go to Ponderosa, nothing against Ponderosa. I don't know that I've ever been to a Ponderosa
I used to
steakhouse
go
in
all
my
the time
life.
when I was a kid.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, baby.
Rob's been, I haven't. But they're leaving the Ponderosa Steakhouse and they're walking hand in hand out to the car. They've been visiting family, but are driving home to Melbourne, Florida. And as they walk to their car, Jeff is shot in the stomach.
Ouch.
911 is called. Jeff does survive. But tucked back in the woods and tacked to a tree is another note. So when they come in to investigate this shooting of Jeff, they look around and they find tucked in the woods on the tree again, it's a Ziploc bag. And the ATF dog actually finds the bullet casing back there.
Oh.
And what I didn't think about, but I could see where it would happen for sure. You can leave DNA behind on a Ziploc bag as you're like pressing it down. So maybe not a finger, but you're sliding your finger across the top. DNA.
Okay.
And inside the Ziploc bag, there's a note that says, "Do not release to the press. We have tried to contact you to start negotiation." The letter includes the demand for $10 million, giving a 16-digit account number and a PIN for a stolen Bank of America Platinum card.
Okay.
Yeah. And it says, quote, "We have unlimited withdrawal at any ATM worldwide." End quote.
All right.
The credit card was actually stolen from a Greyhound bus driver in Flagstaff, Arizona, who told the Washington Post it was taken from a pouch behind her seat as she drove between Nogales, Arizona, and Flagstaff on March 25th.
All right.
And authorities later told her that her card was used to purchase gas in Tacoma, Washington, where Mohammed had once lived.
Gotcha.
Now, the letter that they leave behind this time, it rails against operators of the sniper telephone tip line. They're like, we tried to call, and it just basically says they're incompetent and says that officials took the call as a hoax or a joke. And the letter reproduced in the Saturday edition of the Washington Post says, quote, your failure to respond has cost you 5 lives.
Wow.
End quote. And they also say in this note, quote, if stopping the killing is more important than catching us now, then you will accept our demands, which are non-negotiable. The letter also included the chilling postscript publicized worldwide by police, quote, your children are not safe anywhere at any time.
Can you imagine
End
being
quote.
a cop at this moment in time?
Oh, I've seen interviews with them, and
Jeez.
nobody was sleeping.
Yeah.
They were up all night. They were working the case. I mean, they had to be like told to go home and get some sleep
Yeah.
because they were just working 24/7. So making contact with the police is a clear goal of these guys. You know,
Right.
it's clear in their letter.
Right.
And it gave a number for a phone booth outside the Ponderosa restaurant in Virginia where they'd shot Jeffrey Hopper, telling authorities to await a call and again warning that by complying with the demands, quote, you will have less body bags.
Wow.
Yeah. And then it ends with, quote, word is bond, end quote. Now, there are a lot of people who think that that is like a Jamaican saying from like a reggae song or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I did read that somewhere. But police are running the DNA on this Ziploc bag first, and they miss the time for the first call, which is 6 a.m. Because remember, these guys are up early.
Dudes, get an alarm clock.
So Police Chief Moose calls a press conference and says, quote, to the person who left us a message at the Ponderosa last night, we do want to talk to you. Call us at the number you provided, end quote. On the morning of October 21st, the call comes in. The caller, who is Lee,
Right.
tells police to follow the instructions on the note or more people will be killed. They were told to tell the press that the sniper had been caught, quote, like a duck in a noose, end quote. And they say your children are not safe. The call is tracked to a gas station, and police rush over there and arrest 2 men who are not Lee and John,
Wow.
but they do have a white van truck. They're only illegals in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
This white van thing, it's
Yeah.
just crippling them.
Yep.
But the FBI is looking really closely at this note that they leave behind at the Ponderosa, the one that's in the Ziploc bag.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, the killers are taking credit for a shooting in Montgomery, Alabama. It's the ABC liquor store where Claudine Parker was killed and Kelly Adams was badly wounded.
Okay.
That case had not been connected to the D.C. area killings. But what they had from the Montgomery, Alabama crime scene was the fingerprint on the magazine.
There's the
and
magazine. I was about ready to ask about that again.
and the ballistic evidence, because the magazine was dropped at the crime scene, had fingerprints of Lee Boyd Malvo all over it.
breakdown, you're busted.
Yep. And it was his fingerprints taken by the immigration officials in Bellingham, Washington, that they matched to the prints
All right.
on the magazine.
So they got an ID now.
Yeah, so they have a name, Lee Boyd Malvo. But he's a teen. He's a kid.
Sure.
So who else is with him? And police think we're on to them. The immigration papers show that there was some sort of custody battle over Lee between his mother and another man, John Mohammed.
Uh-oh.
So these papers that he forged, it's all coming back to bite him in the ass. Then at 6 a.m. on October 22nd, Conrad Johnson, better known as CJ, is getting ready for his shift as a bus driver. He was born on March 14th in 1967 in Jamaica and was the son of Jamaican immigrants. He was a husband of 17 years to his wife Denise and father to 2 boys. He was a 10-year employee of Montgomery County, Maryland. He drove a bus. CJ prided himself on his pot roast and his curry chicken. He coached basketball at the Fort Washington Boys and Girls Club, and he loved to play basketball with his sons. He was a prankster, but also the first to lend an extra hand if somebody needed help. He was preparing for his morning commuter run. He stood at the bottom steps of his bus when he was shot, one single gunshot to the chest. CJ was killed instantly. Attached nearby to another tree is a message, quote, "Your incompetence has cost you another life."
Wow.
End quote. He taunts them.
Yeah.
Now remember Robert Holmes. He's the one from Washington State who called into the tip line and said, "This sounds like something a guy I know would do."
Yeah.
Well, he'd called 5 days before. Someone finds a record of this call, and they call him back. And what they want is for him to listen to some of the tapes to see if it sounds like his friend on the phone.
Okay.
Because they know they have Lee Boyd Malvo,
Right.
and they know that John Muhammad wanted to have this kid. There was a
Sure.
custody battle, wanted to have this kid.
That there's a connection there.
They know there's a connection there, but they want to know, do you hear these voices? Who do you think this is?
Right.
And he listens to it, and Robert tells them that, yes, that's the voice of Lee Malvo, a kid that hangs out with John Muhammad. And he tells the FBI that John is pissed at his wife, Mildred, and that he has lost his children to her, and that he had threatened to kill her.
Wow.
He also tells the FBI that there's a tree stump in his backyard that John and Lee used for target practice. So now they have this information from John's friend and the immigration papers that show that John wanted custody of Lee. And ATF now has this name, John Muhammad. So they run his name to see if he had purchased any guns.
Okay.
And he had a Bushmaster
There you go.
223,
Yep.
which was a federal violation since he had been served with a restraining order to stay away from his ex-wife.
Right.
And that gave the ATF the ability to charge him with federal weapons violations. They have a reason to go after him, even if they don't have any evidence
Sure.
that he's a shooter.
Right.
And Lee was clearly connected to him. And you know what else was connected to John Muhammad? Registration papers for a blue Chevy Caprice with the license plate of NDA21Z. They looked him up, and it's all starting to come together.
I was just about ready to say that exact same thing. It's all coming together.
all coming together. NDA21Z Jersey plates.
Okay.
And that description was given to the news media and shared far and wide.
Yep.
Now, anybody can be a hero, you know? Anybody.
Yep.
So I want you to meet Whitney Donahue,
Okay.
a man who repaired industrial refrigerators. On October 24th at 11:30 p.m., Whitney is on Route 66, working late in Virginia. He's still 2 hours away from home. He turns on the radio station to help him stay awake, and what does he hear? Authorities are looking for a blue Chevy Caprice with the license plate NDA21Z Jersey plates. And it just so happened that Whitney Donahue at one point in his life actually owned a Chevy Caprice. He knew exactly what this car looked like.
Right. And what are the odds?
So he starts scanning cars as he's driving. It's like a fun little game, right?
Right.
He gets on Route 70 and decides to make a pit stop at the rest area on South Mountain.
He's playing I Spy.
He is. That's
Yeah.
basically what he's doing.
Yeah.
He turns into a rest stop, and what does he see? A blue Caprice Classic.
There you go.
So he pulls into the parking lot so he can see the tag a little bit better because it's Jersey plates, NDA21Z.
Bingo.
Whitney pulls in near the car, picks up his cell phone, and calls 911 to say, "Yo, I found him."
I got your car.
I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but he calls 911 and says, "Yeah, I just found him."
Yeah.
It's been 21 days. Even more than that if you count all the people that these two killed before they focused their attention in Washington, D.C. area.
Right.
The tactical teams prepare for a shootout. They're just sitting in their car asleep at the rest area. So this tactical team comes in. They come in through the woods behind the rest area. They're like sneaking in the middle of the night.
It was like, remember in the Blues Brothers?
Yes,
Toward the end when all the...
exactly. And all the guns are pointed at them. That's pretty much what happened.
Sorry.
Because
There's my film reference for this week.
they rush the car, and Lee is stunned because he's half asleep.
Right.
And John wakes up and he's pissed because they got caught. He is mad.
You're busted.
Inside the car, they find the Bushmaster .223 caliber rifle that had been used in each attack, a rifle's scope for taking aim, and a tripod to steady the shots, a back seat that had sheet metal removed between the passenger and compartment and the trunk, enabling the shooter to get into the trunk from inside the car, the Chevy Caprice owner's manual. And that's important because the FBI laboratory later detected the written impressions of one of the demand notes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
A digital voice recorder used by both Lee and John to make extortion demands. The laptop stolen from victim Paul LaRufa from September in Louisiana, containing maps of the shooting sites and getaway routes from some of the crime scenes, and road maps and walkie-talkies. So here's what he would do. They planned these attacks. They didn't know who they were going to kill, but they picked the location so that whenever they shot someone, they were going away from traffic. So if traffic was heavy coming one way into the city, they were always on the route that was empty. Wow. They were never caught in traffic. They always thought these things through.
They had a strategy.
Yeah. Now, John Muhammad did not talk. And Lee Boyd Malvo started talking when they fed him. He was starving.
Yeah.
Lee said that he fasted before a kill and it improved his aim.
Wow.
I also read that the two of them had sex after each kill.
What?
But there's a lot of information about these two, and some of it's conflicting. But that apparently is straight from Lee Boyd Malvo's mouth, that they would have sex together, the two of them. Yeah. They wanted to do multiple killings a day because they knew the police couldn't handle it. This is what Lee is telling them. And Lee's actually laughing about some of the kills he did. He's very disconnected from it all. John taught Lee hatred. He taught him how to hate. This was a kid who was very impressionable, and I'm not defending him. Believe me, he murdered a lot of people.
Right.
But I don't think he would have ever ended up as a killer if it weren't for John Muhammad.
Yeah.
I think he would have ended up as a pilot or something else, or something that he wanted to be.
In the beginning of the story, I mean, everybody liked him. He was a good kid. I mean, he was living on his own at 15, but he was still a good kid.
He was still a good kid and loved by his teachers and counselors.
Yeah.
Now, both Lee Boyd Malvo and John Allen Muhammad were convicted at trial or pled guilty in multiple court cases in Maryland and Virginia.
Can you imagine trying to be their defense attorney?
No, I can't. I mean, these men were the most hated in that entire area.
You get that served to you, as a defense attorney. You're going, you got a money laundering or a mob case or anything but this?
Yeah. But both are sentenced to life without parole. But John Muhammad also received the death penalty in Virginia. And on November 10th, 2009, he was executed.
Wow.
He died by lethal injection at the Greenville Correctional Center in Virginia.
I didn't know that.
Now, it's been almost 20 years since these two murdered so many. It'll be 20 years this coming October. 20 years since they murdered all these people in cold blood.
Right.
Lee Boyd Malvo is now 37 years old, and a lot has changed in the last 20 years. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences without parole for juvenile defenders was now banned, barred. They couldn't do that anymore, that was wrong. They changed the ruling.
New rules.
And in 2020, the Commonwealth of Virginia also passed similar legislation. So Lee was 17 at the time.
Right.
And now Lee Boyd Malvo has been back in court. And in an agreement signed on February 22nd of 2020, Lee agreed not to seek a resentencing, but could be eligible for parole soon.
Oh, God.
Because he was 17 when he did this, and he can no longer have a mandatory life sentence without parole because he was a juvenile defender. And the Supreme Court ruled this.
Wow. No exceptions?
No exceptions. He is serving 4 life sentences in Virginia and could be eligible for parole in that state. If he is paroled, he would be moved to a Maryland prison because he was also sentenced to 6 life sentences in that state.
So he's never going to see the light of day.
Maybe not. COVID has slowed down the process, but it looks like 2024 is his year for all this to be heard.
Yeah, but he's got to be paroled first.
Right. Yeah. And just because he's eligible doesn't mean that he will be.
Yeah.
But the 6 life sentences are being challenged in the state of Maryland by his attorneys.
Yeah, let me know how that works out for you.
In March of 2020, Lee got married.
What?
He married Sable Noel Knapp. Sable is a 31-year-old granddaughter of a wealthy real estate developer from Iowa and is an outspoken activist who has contributed huge sums of money to causes.
Wow. Well, I guess that proves there's someone for everyone.
Lee also did a documentary for Vice TV called I Sniper. I did not watch this because it's his words. It's the documentary in his words. And I didn't really care what he had to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be slanted in his favor.
I just didn't really care. Yeah. There were a lot of people who were really upset that he got this platform to do this documentary.
Of course.
You can go check it out if you want. I did not. It's not in my notes. It's not. I will not have a link to it in the show notes.
Can you imagine being a victim's family member and then all of a sudden you see this guy, he's got a TV special?
Exactly.
Please.
And there were a lot of people who felt that way.
Yeah, exactly.
But in this documentary, he says, quote, "It is not natural to kill anything, but once you've done it the first time, it becomes easier each time. I was a thief. I stole people's lives. What inside me made that possible?" End quote. So all of these people murdered, maimed, shot, PTSD, lives shattered, divorces happened afterwards, people lost their kids. I mean, I read so many stories about these poor victims that were just randomly taken. I did see that when it came time for John Muhammad to be executed, that the nanny, who was from Iowa, her father said, instead of executing him, let me have him. Let me take him out into the Iowa desert for 3 days. Yeah. Just let me have him for 3 days. Yeah. And I even saw a quote where he said, I know that doesn't make me a Christian, but at this point, I don't care. Yeah. He took my daughter from me.
I don't blame him.
Yeah. I mean, and there are tons of people out there
Old Testament, eye for an eye.
Who feel that way, I'm sure.
Yep.
And there were lots of people who did show up for his execution. He said nothing before the lethal injection, and he did remain pretty quiet the whole time through his years in prison on death row.
Okay.
Unlike Lee Boyd Malvo, who
sang like a canary.
And now has his own documentary. Yeah. Exactly. But that is the story of the DC snipers, Lee Boyd Malvo and John Muhammad, and that's all I have to say about that. Hey, Hitched to Homicide listeners. This is Chris Calvert. I love doing research and writing about real crimes, but I also love writing about fictional people who commit horrible atrocities. When you're ready to take a break from true crime for fictional crime, go to chriscalvert.com, where you'll find all my books, including some free ones to get you started. Jane Doe is one badass chick who quietly hunts terrorists in the United States. The Sex and Lies books are all FBI and CIA cases with a little romance on the side. And coming summer 2022, Book 10 in the series, Sex, Lies, and Rock and Roll, releases. You can find all of these books everywhere, and if you like to listen instead of read, you can find them all on Audible. So go grab a free book or take a listen. I love all the characters I've written. I've given them pain, ruined their lives, make them suffer, and maybe even throw in a heroic death. Or maybe they live to fight another day. Check it all out at chriscalvert.com, and thanks for being a listener of Hitched to Homicide.
Okay, well, that was a case and a half.
It was a lot.
You know, and it's funny because I remember when all that was going down. I mean, not living in D.C., you're so far removed from it, but I remember just the cases in D.C. I didn't realize that they were everywhere else in the country. Yeah,
when I started researching this case, I had no idea either.
Yeah.
And I know that was a long one, but I really wanted to do all of those victims justice.
Oh, yeah. They need to have their day.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, let's do a little.
Let's lighten it up a little.
Yeah, exactly, with a little bless your heart.
Hit me with one. Let's do it.
Here we go.
Well, bless your heart.
Dateline, Glasgow, Scotland. Wow, across the pond.
Yes.
Man accused of shoplifting reveals bulge was just his 10-inch penis. A man was accused of okay. A man was accused of shoplifting after staff clocked a suspicious bulge in his jeans, only for it to transpire that his trousers weren't full of stolen goods, just his 10-inch penis. Window fitter Steve Whitehurst, 47, was out shopping at Scott's Menwears in Stoke-on-Trent with girlfriend Mandy Shenton, 46, and her 18-month-old grandson. When he headed to the till to pay...
there's a baby there, too.
I know.
Okay.
It just gets worse. When he headed to the till, they call him a till, the register. When he headed to the till to pay the 400 pounds or $494 of items he'd picked out, the store manager confronted him about the bulge. He claimed he was forced to show security what he was actually packing. Steve said, I had very tight jeans on that day and there was a bulge, yes, but that's not illegal. I can't help the way I'm made. I made the way God made me. The manager started arguing with me. She wouldn't let it go. I kept telling her it was my penis. Eventually, I dropped my trousers in front of everyone and just stood there with my boxer shorts on and said, see, I've got nothing to hide. But that didn't satisfy her. She kept saying, what's that bulge? Steve, who claims he often has to roll up his manhood, said he said he had to go into a cubicle with a male security guard to prove what was behind the mysterious mound. I like that. In his jeans. He continued, I dropped my boxers. He shook his head and ran out, spoke with the manager. I heard her say, please tell me he's got something down there. And the guy said, yeah, no. Recalling last Sunday's shopping...
Oh, he's got something. It's just not merchandise.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's merchandise, but it's not owned by that store. Recalling last Sunday's shopping trip as the craziest experience of my life, he has since made a complaint to the company.
I bet he did.
Hope he got some new jeans that were a little looser. According to JD Sports, which owns Scott's Menwear, said... The customer in question was exhibiting suspicious behavior, and when the store manager confronted the customer, he became abusive.
I bet.
At no point did any colleague ask the customer to remove any clothing.
So it's a he said, she said. It's a he said, she said.
Yeah.
Or he said.
Yeah, I don't know who said what, but jeez. Can you imagine?
That's a good one.
Oh.
That's a good one. Well, if you ever bless your heart,
wow,
go to our website, hitchedtohomicide.com, and fill out that form, or you can email me, Chris at hitchedtohomicide.com.
Yeah.
That's all we have this week.
That's all he had.
It's time to call the show after the 10-inch penis.
Oh, my gosh. That was just too much.
That's my husband, Rob, over there.
And that's my beautiful bride, Chris, over there.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Goodbye, y'all.